The best way to, quote, worship is to seek it within ourselves. And even a little practice of this allows us then to see that spirit everywhere. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very special day. You know, Swami Kriyananda, our founder, passed in 2013, and during his lifetime, he did not want us to make such a display. He said, "I'm not the guru. I'm striving to be a good disciple." And as Yogananda himself said of himself, he, Yogananda, is the last of the line of this particular lineage. But since he's not here to correct us, we put his picture up there anyway. I suspect at this point, being disincarnate, as it were, he won't mind all that much. In any case, we are, with great reverence and fondness, we wouldn't even be here today if it weren't for him. You know, I've never cared much for that word in our language of English called worship. It always conjures up in my mind something I don't find particularly appealing. I'm sure that's not true for everyone, of course, but it may be true for some of you. I prefer the word reverence. You know, we speak so much on the path of meditation and Advaita Vedanta, the path of oneness and the merging of the Atman, the soul, into the Great Spirit and so forth. We speak of all these wonderful ideas, and yet, you know, I think you see Babaji here. That's not a picture, of course, that's a drawing, isn't it? And Yogananda, when he was in Calcutta in 1935 or 6, he asked his brother, Ananda, who was a quite renowned painter, to sit with him, and together, Yogananda having seen Babaji and visited by him, to make a drawing, because there was no picture of Babaji. So imagine each of us, those of us who do feel a certain kinship and reverence towards Babaji, the great Mahavatar, who is renowned throughout the world these days in many different ways and many different places. Some of us here in this room even today have visited the cave where Babaji initiated Lahiri Mahashay. But where would we be today? Where would our reverence be today if there weren't even a drawing of Babaji? Do you see what I mean? Lahiri Mahashay allowed his picture to be taken here in the 19th century. There's a story that goes with it, but you're not going to get to hear that story right now. And he allowed his picture to be taken, and he apparently had a stack of pictures in where he lived, apparently, because some disciple came, and you know, he just had a few people sitting with him in that room in Calcutta, and I see Michelle David back there, and different ones of you here. We've stood in front of that door. The family who owns the place where he lived won't let us in except once a year, but we've stood there, haven't we, Kathleen? And prayed, as it were, at the door. But he must have had a stack of pictures or something, which sounds sort of weird, but he did. In fact, Yogananda even had billboards with his picture on it, okay? And so anyway, so this disciple comes in and asks the master, Lahiri, if he had a picture. And he said, "This picture is just a picture," he said, "unless you treat it with reverence." You know, there's traditions in East and West. Being raised, probably none of you know that I was raised as a Catholic. That was a joke. Anyway, and there are traditions in Christianity of crucifixes. You know, the Saint Francis, who is dearly beloved by us, a crucifix spoke to him, "Rebuild my church." Padre Pio prayed before a crucifix in 20th century, and blood came streaming out of the crucifix. Paramahansa Yogananda prayed at Dakshineshwar, that many of us here in this room have visited, just outside, it's north of Calcutta. It's not a very ancient temple. In fact, it was built in the 19th century, beautiful temple, where the goddess Kali is installed there. And Yogananda prayed in the portico there, as many of us have done, and Kali came to life. And so, you know, I think of the old, when I was a kid, and they told me the story about poor old Moses. The poor guy, he had a tough time. He went up to the Mount Sinai and brought those tablets down for the daggum Israelites, and he was so ticked off because what did they do while he was up there for 40 days fasting and praying? What did they do? They built a golden calf and worshipped it. Now, I give the Israelites more credit. I don't think they were that dumb, okay? To build a golden calf and worship it, I mean, you guys are right, you know. No, it's a symbol for what most people in fact worship. The golden calf of beauty, the golden calf of money, the golden calf of name and fame, and all the things human beings worship in the sense that they seek and wish to have. And so, in any case, the poor fellow broke those tablets. He had to get them twice from God. Did you know that? He went up there, he got these tablets, came down and saw these guys with that golden calf, and he was so ticked off, he threw them down and they broke into pieces. He had to go back up and have God give him some more. But they couldn't possibly have thought that golden calf was anything. And all my friends from India, you know, we speak of idols. Well, us Christians, you know, you start talking about worshiping idols and we're going to go running out the door, right? I mean, thou shalt not have false whatever is before you. And so we need to understand. I remember in Padma and Jamuna, different ones of us, Nivritti, over the years when Swami Kriyananda was alive, you know, different ones of us worked in various ways with him in the work of Ananda, and so different times we had to go in and talk to him. And so you'd go in, you know, with a disturbed mind and these questions, you're going to wrestle them to the floor and get an answer out of the old buster. And you'd go in there and sit, and he'd be in his office, and he'd be composing music or writing a book or something like this, and he'd say, have a seat, you know, and sort of have a seat. And so after a while, he'd start talking about his latest music or his latest book or something. And by the time he was done talking, I couldn't remember what I came in there for. The fact is notwithstanding Advaita Vedanta, so to speak, notwithstanding the goal of oneness, we need one another. God has incarnated in your form and my form. This, Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. They thought, of course, the dummies, that he was talking about the Temple of Jerusalem. And then it says in parentheses, and he understood that he spoke of his body temple. And so this is the great paradox of the Spirit. For the Spirit and the flesh became, and what is it? The flesh suddenly dwelt among us, that's it. And so it is that God has incarnated in you and I. And whereas in you and I and the rocks and the trees are not exactly self-realized yet, the avatars, the great saints of East and West, have achieved that realization. Swami once pointed out, for example, he said, well, and I've done this, I've picked up rocks in different places of pilgrimage that I've gone to, you know, and I have them on my altar. Can't remember which rocks are which anymore, however, but I like those rocks, you know. And, but Swami pointed out, what would you value more? A rock that you got at some sacred place, or a saint? The living presence, conscious realization of a saint, which are rare, admittedly, but nonetheless. And so it is with that reverence, with that respect, that we realize that the truth that shall make us free, the realization of what is true, is more increasingly manifested in those who have achieved those different levels. You know, Mark Twain once said, I bet he said it more than once because he was a very popular speaker in America, but he said, you know, travel is a fool's paradise. because wherever you go, you're still there. And I've done my share of traveling, and there is some truth to what he says, but the deeper truth, well, another way of putting what he says is, don't go seeking that which you haven't found within yourself. And that's what happened to me when I first went to India in 1975 and traveled overland from Europe and drove the length and breadth of India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, and all the countries in between. I didn't find what I was looking for. I had to come home to find it because it wasn't there. And that's what I realized on the trip home. A little over 2 years ago, Morley was kind enough, and whose birthday was yesterday and we celebrate today, to acquiesce to my pestering him to take me back to South India, where I had only been many, many decades ago. And I love South India far more than the North for various reasons that aren't relevant to my talk today. In any case, we visited some very sacred places. But without that inner awakening of the reverence and the spirit within ourselves, we're not going to find it in those places. And yet, just as being in the presence of a saint or a master brings to us the vibrations of peace, so too places where that vibration has, as it were, come to earth, like a wormhole into infinity, into oneness. That wormhole, that vibration, that portal to peace still exists. It's, of course, everywhere. But as Isaiah said, be still and know that I am God. And who is the I? Well, it's all of us. It's not just so-and-so, what's his face? And so when you have that realization, you can touch it wherever you go. You can see it in other people. And when you go to holy places, then you feel the power of it. There were 2 such places among several that I wanted to mention in honor of our trip a couple of years ago. Just outside of Mysore is Chamundi Hills, where is a very famous temple to Divine Mother. And Morley and I went up the hill to that. Had a wonderful time at this. I think it was a special day that day, as I recall. Thousands of devotees were there going through the lines and going up to the inner sanctum where the idol is installed and getting the darshan of the idol and so on. It was just perfectly beautiful experience. But then afterwards, he and I were wandering around the precinct, and in the back of this giant temple were a few smaller ones. And there was one temple to Shiva, one of my favorites among many, and it just sort of drew us into it. And we went inside, meditated, and it was just, wow. It was infinite. It was perfect peace. It was right there. Nobody was there. Thousands were in the main building. It was just he and I. We felt the power. I like to call it the power of Shiva. The power of Shiva. And Shiva's right here, actually. He's honoring us with his presence. But you can feel that power when you seek it. You must find it, however, within. And then it radiates and attracts to yourself without. And then when we were in Sringeri, which was the first place, I think, is it called Mat or Mutt? Anyway, the great reformer of Hinduism in the end of the first millennia, Swami Shankara, who became the first Shankaracharya, the Adi Shankaracharya, founded a number of sacred places in the cardinal points of India, and the first one he founded was in the rainforest of Sringeri. And Morley took me there. Master Yogananda had visited there in 1935, and the Shankaracharya of his day in the 30s was a very elevated soul, a very high soul that Yogananda visited him there. Morley knows everybody in India. I don't think there's anybody there he doesn't know, but he happens to have a friend in Sringeri at whose home we stayed, and it was just a very special person and his wife, but Sringeri is a beautiful, has very high vibrations there. Anyway, we went up to Ceremony Falls, which is a couple of miles outside in the rainforest, had a lovely visit there. But on the way back, you know, the dusk in the lower latitudes, nighttime comes really quick. You know, the sun sets, and it's nighttime. And so we were racing to get out of the forest and back to Sringeri before the, you know, it was pitch black. And, but as dusk was coming, there was another Shiva temple just outside of town. I don't quite remember why we decided to stop there. I think Morley said, oh, you have to see it. We have to stop, even if it's getting dark. Anyway, we did. And I'll tell you, I wasn't wearing socks, but if I'd have been wearing socks, it was an incredible experience. I don't know if it's just me and Shiva or whatever it is, but this temple, again, there was what, the one pujari there, I think one guy was there he wanted to close up the place, as I recall. But wow, the power. And there were so many other places, but those were the two I wanted to mention. And we've just had to cancel our pilgrimage to Italy because of the daggum COVID thing, a few other complications. But one of the places in Europe that, I mean, there are so many with St. Francis, but the one that's been my personal highlight is the hilltop, something about hills, right? Mountains, because I love the Himalayas. I've crawled all through the Himalayas and I hope to go back again. There's, you know, it's like having Yosemite, but elevated to a sacredness that is, I remember the last tea stall. Remember the last tea stall in India before the Chinese border? It's the path that the Pandava brothers walked as they ascended, left their bodies at the end of Dwapara Yuga. I mean, there's everywhere throughout a place like India is the sacredness of spirit. And you must go there, but you must find that within yourselves first. Okay, that's the secret. You won't find it if you're doing this, you know, if you're grasping outside yourself. But anyway, I'm not sure where I was going.
St. Francis.
I wanted to come back to Europe because on the hilltop of Laverna, which was given to St. Francis by one of his disciples, I guess, and it's there where he received the stigmata. And you go up on that hill, and there's the little nooks and crannies where he prayed, and he would go up there for seclusion. I'll tell you, the power of spirit that's there is just, right, Wyatt? You've been probably numerous times. It's the power there is just, you know, cut it with a knife, as they say. And so here's the paradox. The paradox is, I don't know if Sita's in the room, but she'd laugh if she were, it's both and, you see. There is no denying Spirit's presence anywhere. And although we have the thing most needful, see, last week was we had several weeks where we talked about Martha and Mary, and the thing most needful is the inner path. And this is the pillar of Dwapara Yuga. This is the pillar of what this lineage came to resurrect out of the tomb of Christian ritual and churchianity and all that has its place. But if it doesn't lead you to the well of the woman of Samaria, the well with the eternal water, the water of life, the river of life which resides within us, if it doesn't lead you there, then you'll always be thirsty, you see. It's in that inner temple that resides the water, the river of life. And this is the pillar of the understanding of Dwapara. This is of this age. This is because science says the same thing. Behind all matter is energy. What science can never say, probably, I presume will never be able to say, is behind energy is consciousness, out of which all things have come. But be that as it may, science has its place. okay, in duality. But that's the message of our age, is to seek it within ourselves, and then thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And then, through kindness. Kindness isn't something you grasp for. Oh, I got to be good to, what's her name? Because though she's a big schmuck, I have to love her anyway. No, it's you feel kindness. It's a natural sort of bubbling up. You can't possibly love everybody. I mean, some people are schmucks, let's face it. And just kidding. But if you're feeling loving, it's not an issue. Do you see the difference? When it lives within you, joy is within you, then it's no longer a question. And so when we say that one thing is needful, to go within and find the Spirit, it's just the beginning. That's the point, you see. When Yogananda called his work Yogoda Satsanga, Yogoda is that which imparts yoga. Satsang is fellowship. Self-realization, fellowship. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love thy neighbor as thyself. These are the two great commandments. And Jesus was asked the question, what the heck do you teach? That's what he said. And what he said, he didn't even invent. It came from the Old Testament. This is the eternal message. But the message part that's been lost is to seek it within. Joy is within us. The kingdom of, Jesus said it, but of course that didn't mean much apparently. It went away. Kingdom of heaven is within you. There was another point where he said, go into thy closet, close the door, and pray to the Father which is in silence. You see, this is the new dispensation. It's not a new anything really, but we've forgotten it. And it's the same in India. Those of us from the West who perhaps have not been to India imagine that everybody's sitting there meditating, but it's not true, is it, Shiva? In fact, although it's coming back into practice, like it is here, everywhere, it has not been the norm. Puja, ritual, etc. Mantras, yes. Sacrifices, yagyas, yes. The same East and West, you see. And so the time for knowing God, Yogananda would thunder from the pulpit, is now. And that's the message of this. The best way to, quote, worship is to seek it within ourselves. And when we find that, even a touch, even a little practice of this inward religion, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, will free us. And even a little practice of this allows us then to see that Spirit everywhere. Happy birthday, Swamiji. Happy birthday, Murliji.